Thank you so much for joining this afternoon for another Lunch and Learn. I am Nicole, founder of Homework for Kids, mother of two. Homework for Kids is still the newest online community dedicated to helping parents connect with K through 12 educators and tutors. We donate a portion of our profits to kids' educational charities because we believe every child deserves access to a quality education. And I was just looking this morning, and we are up to 225 tutors registered for Homework for Kids who are willing to tutor both online and in person, depending on your needs. And today, I'm thrilled to introduce Kelly Burkett. She is our speaker. Let me pull up my screen for you guys to see. Today we were talking about motivating students through peaceful parenting. Here we go. And a little bit about Kelly. Kelly is a licensed professional counselor and AHA certified peaceful parenting coach. She is a mom to 3 young children, twin girls, and a son. She has a master's degree in counseling psychology and for many years worked as a therapist in outpatient mental health, addiction, and trauma programs. She loved this work, found it incredibly gratifying to help another person change, heal, and grow. And after the birth of her twin daughter, she decided to put her therapist job on hold to stay home as a full-time, which I can understand. After that first child's born, you're like, how am I going back to work? Because it's a challenge. Let me see if I can stop this now. And so Kelly, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as Nicole said, I've got 3 kids, so I do know, firsthand how amazing and wonderful parenting is and simultaneously how challenging. And I think as a result of, COVID, it's been really hard. It's been hard for us as parents and for kids. And so today we're going to talk about, peaceful parenting and how it relates to homework and the classroom. And so I thought we could just start. I can kind of give you a brief overview of this approach to parenting. It might be familiar to some of you. It might be really new to some of you. And then we can talk a little bit about some of these tools and ideas of peaceful parenting and how they can be helpful in the classroom and helping you help your child as it relates to education and homework. So peaceful parenting is based on the work of Dr. Laura Markham. She's the founder of AHA Parenting. She's the author of Peaceful Parent, Happy Kids, is my mentor. You've probably heard of gentle parenting, positive parenting. It's really all, pages in the same book. And more than any specific thing that you do, it's really a belief system. And it's an approach to looking at your child and their behavior with a different understanding. So there's 3 main concepts. The first is parent self-regulation. And this basically means that we as the adult are looking at our mood, our beliefs, our triggers, and working to prioritize, not reacting from a place of upset. This does not mean you need to be Mother Teresa and peaceful all the time. The joke that Dr. Laura always makes is that nobody can be Mother Teresa because, she didn't have any children. So it was easy for her to be peaceful, but there's no such thing as a perfect parent, but looking at, our hot buttons and looking at, when our cup is really on empty and we're feeling really depleted, like our own needs aren't getting met, that often means that we're more reactive with our kids. Sometimes that means yelling, saying things that you can kind of catch yourself and know, like, I don't want to be interacting this way, but I just feel so triggered or so upset. And so a big part of peaceful parenting is looking at how we give ourselves more support so that we can show up more consistently in a way that we want to. One great tool, and as I go through each of the 3 parts of peaceful parenting, I just want to give you kind of one key idea from each of them that's sort of an actionable idea. And the first with regulation is a tool called stop, drop, and breathe. So the second you notice that you're getting triggered, you're getting frustrated, you can sort of like feel the yell coming up or just like feel your whole body tensing, You stop whatever it is that you're doing and you drop the agenda. The agenda might be you want your kid to get off his iPad, or you want him to get in the bath, or you want him to, put his shoes on, or whatever it is. And in the moment, you just let that agenda go, right? It's not an emergency. There are very few actual emergencies of parenting. Obviously, things like safety, streets, car seats, all of those things. But let the agenda go just for the moment and breathe. I like to put my hands on my heart, take a deep breath, stop, drop, and breathe. And you want to develop a mantra, which is basically something that you say to yourself that kind of lets you take a step back. It might be, he's acting like a 5-year-old because he is a 5-year-old. This isn't an emergency. It's not personal. I can handle it. Choose love. Whatever it is, it's just sort of a shorthand way of pressing pause for the moment so that you can just sort of take a step back to think about how you want to respond versus just reacting. The idea with stop, drop, and breathe and using a mantra is that the brain rewires depending on where we put our attention and our focus. So the more you practice stop, drop, and breathe, the easier it gets. And you start to kind of catch yourself, and you can notice when you're starting to get triggered and you're starting to get frustrated, and give yourself the space to take a step back. And if you do mindfulness, if you do meditation, we know that these things really do rewire our brain the more we focus on them. So that self-regulation, I think it is quite possibly the hardest part of parenting. I think it's the part of parenting that we don't talk about enough, because it's challenging, and some kids are harder than others, and it makes it harder to regulate. So that is the first and most important piece. The second is connection. And connection really is about the relationship, right? Parenting is a relationship. And we are always looking at ways to maintain and to strengthen the parent-child relationship. So a lot of conventional methods of parenting focus on different ways to kind of change behaviors, to increase behaviors we want to see and to decrease behaviors we don't want to see. And that might be something like a timeout, a punishment, even a bribe, right? And the idea with a lot of these things is they may stop a behavior in the moment, right? You may say to your kid, if you do your homework every day, you're going to get X, Y, and Z. Or if you don't do your homework, I'm going to take away your iPad or your Nintendo, right? Some kids, if all kids are on a continuum, if you've got a really cooperative, compliant, wants to be the good kid, right? They may buck up and do what you want them to do. If you have a strong-willed or spirited kid, they will not. They see it as a matter of integrity to not back down, and it becomes a power struggle, right? It becomes two lawyers sort of going toe to toe. And what happens, especially as kids get older, is that you lose that influence, right? You might have been able to use fear or use bribes when a kid is younger, but they get older and it doesn't work. And parents are really at a loss for what to do. And there's a lot of research to talk about why these things don't work, but the long and short of it is that it disrupts the connection. It makes kids feel, controlled. It makes them feel manipulated, like they push back on that, because all humans want autonomy and they want choice and they want free will. And so it actually makes things much more complicated, and it makes it a lot harder. So the connection is really everything. It's what makes parenting worth it. And it's what gives us influence, so that kids, they have their own agenda, right? And they have their own things that they want to do, but they're more likely to give those things up because of the relationship, right? If you think about your partner, right? Let's say your partner comes downstairs and they say, I left my phone upstairs. Gosh, it's by the bedside table. Can you get it? I really need to get out the door. If you're in a good place with your partner, you're like, sure, no problem. I'd be happy to go up the stairs and get the phone for you, right? Even if it's not what you wanted to do, you do that because there's goodwill. There's connection capital there because there's a good relationship with that person. If not, you don't want to do it. So it's the same thing with kids, and especially with homework, right? Which is what we're going to talk about today. No matter how we spin it, right? Homework does not feel like a priority for kids. It doesn't feel fun. It feels like one more thing that we're asking them to do at the end of a long day. Just like brushing teeth, cleaning up their room, right? They are going to have different priorities than we do. And there are obviously expectations we have for our kids. And even if they don't like these things, they have to do them. But connection is really all about figuring out, how to come alongside them to make it more likely that these things happen without the power struggle. So one great way to increase connection is a tool called empathy. And empathy just means that you are trying to see the situation from your child's perspective. Doesn't mean you agree with why they're upset or what they don't like, but you're asking yourself, why does this behavior make sense? Or what must be going on for my child? Or I wonder how they really feel. So it could be, I'm trying to think of something that kind of happened. My 4-year-old has very strong ideas and opinions, right? And wanted to put, his lunchbox and his water bottle in his backpack in the way that he wanted to put it in, right? And if you look at it from the surface, you're like, who cares? Just put it in. We've got to go. It doesn't matter. And to try to make that a power struggle instead of sort of stepping back and saying I wonder why this is so important to him, right? And the other day was because the water bottle was on the front, and when he took it out, it fell and it spilled and he was embarrassed and the water went all over the place, right? So that's sometimes knowing that I'm oh, I get it, right? I get why you want it to be in a certain way. And we don't always have to get it. We don't always have to understand, but we try to put on that thinking cap of why is this important to my kid? Or why is this hard for my kid? Or why are they not wanting to do this? And it just helps kind of shift our lens and our perspective to see what might be going on. And empathy allows people to feel understood, right? Again, the more kids feel understood, the more they're willing to come alongside and do what we want and to cooperate. So self-regulation, connection, and the third part is emotion coaching. So instead of controlling, instead of punishing, we're looking at how to help kids more effectively manage their emotions. And the idea is that if we want to change behaviors, parents will say a lot of times, I want him to stop hitting his brother or lying or, telling me he did his homework, but he didn't do his homework, right? If we want to change those behaviors, we have to go to the root of what's actually driving them, right? Behaviors are the tip of the iceberg. That's what we see. We want to be curious about what's actually underneath that big block of ice. And underneath are emotions and feelings that kids have a hard time managing because their brains are immature. They don't have the self-regulation. The front part of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, it's the part of the brain that's responsible for higher level thinking, being flexible, delaying gratification, thinking about how another person feels, managing impulses, right? It doesn't come online until kids are 3. It's not fully developed until kids are 25 or 26. Which is why teenagers, kids in college make some pretty terrible choices and decisions. And we're like, what were you thinking, right? They weren't thinking. So emotion coaching is all about helping kids with the emotions and with the feelings, right? Saying something like, you really had a hard time when I said you couldn't go to your friend's house and that you had to, stay home and do X, Y, and Z, right? You got really upset. You got really mad. You started yelling at me, told me I was the worst parent ever, right? I know you were really mad. I know you were really upset, right? I know you didn't mean it. Let's figure out a way the next time you get upset, next time you get frustrated, right? That you can say what you want to say in a way that makes it more likely for me to hear it, right? It's all about collaborative problem solving, being able to say, here's our problem. How do we figure out solving it? Instead of, again, here's the problem. Here's you, here's your kid. It's all about that, that relationship and working together. So that is peaceful parenting in a nutshell: the self-regulation, the connection, and the emotion coaching. Now, this is often a very foreign way of parenting for most people. Most people were not raised this way. Most of us were raised to do what our parents said because they said so, and not question it. And so that is really strict parenting, high expectations, not a whole lot of support, do what I say because I said so. Permissive parenting is often parents giving up the expectation because they just have a really hard time with their kids' big emotions and their kids' feelings. He's crying, he's throwing such a fit, fine, whatever. You don't have to go to soccer. I don't care. And it's not that these parents don't have expectations. It's just that it's really hard to manage like the emotions and the pushback. And so those are like, two different extremes and different sides of the continuum. This approach, peaceful parenting, is high expectations, right? I expect that you are going to not hit your sister. I expect that you're going to go to school. I expect that you're going to, care about your classes. I expect that you're going to treat people kindly, but it's also looking at like the support we give our kids to meet the expectation. And the whole understanding too, I think, is like kids want their lives to work out. They want to be responsible. They want to do what we want them to do. And if that's not happening, we always want to have this like detective hat approach, right? Like what's hard, what's getting in the way, and how do we try to fix it? Because all of the other things are sort of like Band-Aids on bullet wounds, right? They may stop whatever it is or get your kid to do what you want them to do in the short term, but they really don't shift behaviors and they don't create intrinsic motivation, right? As a kid wanting to do something because they actually want to do it. So that is peaceful parenting in a nutshell. I would love to kind of talk about how it relates to homework and school. I can imagine there's a lot of challenges with like, how do I get my kid to do the reading they need to do this summer? Or how do I get them to do their homework when they don't really want to, or they really don't like their teacher? What should I do? And I have like 2 or 3 kind of submitted questions, but for those of you that are here now joining us, I would love to hear your questions or any feedback you have about anything that I just said. I don't know if people are, oh wait, I see a question. Okay. I can start with Deborah's question. Do you want me to start with that, Nicole?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay.
You want me to read it out to you?
Sure. Yep.
Okay. If you have and set an expectation, laid out choices, and are met with refusal, how do you move beyond the conflict?
It's a good question. So I wonder, I don't know if you're on, Deborah, and have an example, but like, is there a specific example you could give me, especially about maybe like the choices that are laid out?
I did not have a specific example, but if my child, let's go to what you just said, has that reading to be done.
Okay.
And does not want to do reading. And I lay out something like, well, we can do the reading, after a game of Uno, or we can play Uno after reading, lay out some sort of options. And just get it. No, I'm not doing reading. Like going back to the initial premise.
Yeah.
How do you move beyond if the choices aren't appealing?
Yeah. What's your understanding of like what's behind the refusal? Like, what is that? If we could kind of get in your kid's head for a minute, what do you think is the resistance to doing the reading? Like, why would that make sense?
They would rather do other things at that time. Okay.
So the reading is just like boring. It's not enjoyable. It's like not what they want to do. Okay. And that usually is a reason, sometimes, especially with school, there can be something else going on and it's like really hard for them, or they don't understand it, or, they don't get it. And then play that forward, right? If you're trying to do something, or you're expected to do something that you don't understand or that you don't like, right? Most humans respond by wanting to avoid or to quit or just kind of shut it down, right? Because it brings up a lot of shame. It brings up a lot of discomfort. And sometimes that's going on. Sometimes it's just like, it's boring. I just don't want to do it. I'd rather do X, Y, and Z. And so I think we kind of go back to the beginning of the connection and what that looks like. And so I think sometimes, and I can speak for myself, sometimes I kind of think I've connected, but I'm not sure that my child would feel that way. So part of it is really trying to front load a little bit more with the empathy. So it would be like out of the moment, right? In the moment is when you're sitting at the table and you're like, we've got to read, what are we going to do? Are we going to do the cards? Are we going to read? Like that's in the moment. Out of the moment might be at another time, being able to say, I wanted to talk to you about something, like would now be a good time, right? Always asking kids too, is now a good time to talk? And to say, the rule from schools that we have to do this reading for the summer. You've got to read 3 books, or you've got to do, X, Y, and Z. Right. And it seems like for you, this isn't what you want to do. seems really boring, right? You really wish you could not do the reading. Like, can you tell me a little bit more about it? Like, is it boring? Is it that you don't like it? Is it that it's hard? Like, tell me a little bit more about what you don't like. Like, and listen, right? Our goal is just to kind of like listen to what kids say and really like doing more empathizing than we actually think. Like, that sounds really frustrating. Like, sounds really boring. I get it, you know, or even saying something like, I didn't realize how boring this felt for you. And now you're telling me, and that really makes sense. Thank you for telling me. Always like, thank you for telling me this. Thank you for trusting me with this. And then, you know, saying, I hear you and it's boring and you don't want to do it, right? And it does have to get done. I'm totally open to your ideas for how it's going to get done. I've got 2 ideas. I've got 2 choices. I'm willing to tell you my choices, but I'd love to hear yours first, right? And again, this is out of the moment, you know, talking about it. And, you know, sometimes kids come up with solutions that like we haven't even thought of, but that work, right? Where initially we might be like, I don't know, like that sounds like I don't know that that's going to work for you to like read it while you're like eating your lunch or something like that. But maybe we're like, you know what? You seem to think that'd be a good idea. I'm not too sure about it. Your call. Let's give it a try and let's see how it works, right? Like, I think it's okay if it's a little bit of an unconventional approach, but it's recognizing like our goal and our priority is different than their priority. And so sometimes we have to do a lot more than we think about trying to just help them understand like how we do understand how they feel. Does that make sense?
It does, and I like the distinction between in the moment and out of the moment. In having out of the moment conversations, though, what do you do when the school is requiring 20 minutes a day? When would we like to do this? Do we want to do this, in the morning or right before bed? How do you think? And they just come back with I think we don't.
Yeah, and you're like, I think though again, it's like starting with the like, if you were a teacher, would you give kids summer reading? No, you wouldn't. Like, all right, so they wouldn't have summer reading. How do you think they would actually like keep up with their reading? Like, do you think, what do you think would happen if they didn't do 20 minutes of reading? Like really just listening and being able to say, I hear you. And you know what? I get that this isn't what you want to do. And I think sometimes it's equating it to like our job. If you went to work 9 to 5 and you came home and your boss like shot you one more email or one more thing to do, right? Most of us wouldn't want to do it. Even if we like our job, we're like, I'm done. Like, this is my boundary. I don't want to do this after school. So sometimes it is trying to remember, like, can we relate in any way? Have we been in that situation? And I think if we're just met with like utter refusal, right, there's probably something else there. Either it's hard or just in general, maybe we have to put a little bit more deposit in the piggy bank of connection. So maybe it's just finding other ways that we feel like we're connecting with our kid, just empathizing more in general, that helps build up that kind of goodwill so that they are more likely to do what we want them to do. So for example, like one other tool that's kind of outside of homework is something like special time, where you would say to your kid, we're going to do special time, or call it their name and say, I've got 10 minutes and I am all yours. We can do whatever you want, right? And you say like, the rules can be a little bit different. It depends on the ages of the kids. With younger kids, I usually say no technology, no screens, but really just like let them play and you go alongside of it. So my 10-year-old loves slime, can't stand slime, but for special time, like I do slime. I like get into it. I really am like there in my head. I'm like, you can do this for 10 minutes. You can do this for 10 minutes. You can do this for 10 minutes. Right. And it just allows her to feel like I care and I'm like joining in on her world. So something like that is like a front loading activity where it helps your child feel seen, connected, delighted in, that when you have to talk about something that's not enjoyable, that they don't want to do, there's a little bit more of like a buy-in because we've put a deposit in for that bank of connection. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
I
think in this case, it's just an understanding that school is school time. And when I'm not in school and I'm on the summer break, that means I don't have to do it. There's a value being, crossed when you say that, you still have to do schoolwork on the summertime.
Yeah.
I put in my time,
And there are people, I mean, there are definitely people that say you take a really backseat role with school and that you say, you know what, you're not going to do your summer reading. Like, this is what I worry about if you don't do your summer reading. And you lay out these ideas, like, you're not kind of keeping up with like your reading, or when you go to school, like, I wonder what it's going to be like for your teacher when you go in and you talk about the summer reading and you don't know what they're talking about. Like, what do you think she's going to say? Do you think anything's going to happen because you haven't done it? Like, there are people that totally say, like, take a back seat on that. I know that is very, very hard for a lot of us to do. I'm not saying that's for everybody. It's certainly an option. And then I do think, like, out of those moments, being able to say, like, education in school is really important in our family, right? There are a lot of things we care about in our family, like being kind, right? School, like, these are our values. And I know this is boring and I know this is tough. And I really would love to figure out how to make this feel tolerable. I don't expect it to be enjoyable for you, right? But tolerable, and like trying to do some of that problem solving. But I think simultaneously it can be helpful if we also look at like the deposits we're putting in their bank of connection, because it just makes it more likely that they'll be open to what we're even talking about.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So my 8-year-old daughter, we get to the point where I say, okay, can you do whatever it is? And let me start by saying I'm 99% certain there is nothing I'm offering that is better than it's on that iPad.
Okay.
Yep. So I try, but if I ask her to do something, I end up taking the iPad away from her, which she only gets 30 minutes of whatever thing she's doing on it per day. But then even once the time is up, she's willingly handed it to me. And then I'm like, okay, great. Now can you do math? I get a scream and I get running upstairs and slamming the door.
What do you think that's about?
She doesn't like math.
Okay.
And math is hard. And so I've tried to sit down and do the problems with her. But the entire time we're doing the problems, like, she'll do one problem and say, now can I have the iPad? Now can I watch TV? Now can I have some candy? Can we stop now? Is this enough? Like, how do I break that?
Yeah.
Constant, let's stop now. Can I do anything other than this?
Yep. And what do you usually say when she says that?
I say, well, let's just try and do a few more problems. Are you willing to do a few more problems? And I'll say, look, because the way the math books are written now, a lot of the practice pages are like the same concept, the entire page. And I'm like, but if you look and you see how this is this and this is this, and then she's like, okay. Now, if I walk away and leave the room and she's committed to doing it, she does the whole thing like this, no problem, hands it to me, it's mostly correct. But if I'm sitting there with her, she'll whine, she doesn't want to do it, this is horrible. And I'm like, but if I walk away, half the time she'll walk away, half the time she'll stay and do it without question. So
that's an interesting way to like also be able to out of the moment, right? Yeah. To be able to talk about it and say, I'm curious, right? Because I think I should sit and help with you because this is boring and this isn't what you want to do. But it seems like when I sit with you, it actually makes it harder for you. And sometimes if I walk away, it works and you actually get it done. And then other times, you don't. So that's tricky, right? Like, what do you think? And like putting it back on her. I also think that the transition from iPad to math it's too much. There needs to be something in between, right?
I mean, it's iPad to everything though, so.
But if you say she only gets 30 minutes, right, then the iPad is really only like is it just one time during the day or does she get multiple 30? Okay.
No, one time.
So then I might say to her something like, out of the moment, right? You love the iPad. The iPad is like your favorite thing. Is it like iPad, mom, dad, candy, Halloween? Like, where is it on the continuum? Like, how important is the iPad to you? Like, and she'll say, yes, it's up there. And you say like, you love the iPad. What do you love about it? Right? Why is this like, if the house was on fire, this is the first thing you would take instead of making sure if like we were all out of the house, right? And like, listen to that, like talk about the iPad. And you might say, the iPad is so cool because of X, Y, and Z, and it makes it hard to shut off the iPad. But why the iPad is also really hard to shut off? It's because the iPad is designed to be like addictive to your brain. You know what that means? It means that your brain wants more of it. So like, you know, you love M&Ms. If I like give you a bowl of M&Ms and I have you like look at one or lick one, right? Wouldn't you be like, oh my gosh, I need all of them. Like it's so hard to only have one. It's the same thing with your iPad, right? It's sort of like this switch gets flipped in your brain and it's really hard to stop it and not be disappointed. It's the same thing with adults, right? It's really hard for a lot of adults to get on off our phones, right? Or off our computers. And to be able to like talk about that with kids, like talk about why it's so hard. And then being able to say, so we need to kind of figure out like when would be the best time for the iPad, right? Like talk about that schedule. And then, you know, if it's like math to iPad, right? Or iPad to math, like, you know, that just might be too tight because the whole time she's doing math, she's like, can I go to the iPad? Can I go to the iPad? And then if she has to get off the iPad, which she loves, and go do something she hates, there needs to be more of like a buffer, you know, in there. And it might be saying to her, like, I think we've been doing this and I'm not sure it's working. Right. So I wonder if, you know, we did the iPad and then maybe we went outside or we had lunch or we did something. Like you talk about different options, what she thinks might work. And I also think just a general idea is how we phrase things to kids. If we say, can you do this? Or do you want to do this? Implicit in that question is a yes or no, right? Can you get in the bath? Can you put your shoes on? Can you stop hitting your brother? Right? It's like, we're inviting the no,
Yeah, right.
Can't do that.
Right.
Right. Instead of like, you know, it's time for you to come to dinner. Right. Or, you know, it's time for us to leave, you know, whatever. Do you want to put your shoes on now or do you want me to help you? Like those, like two choices that we can live with, but looking at how we actually ask the question.
Okay, great. And then I know you were saying earlier about like rewarding. So is it bad to say like, okay, finish your math and then you can have the iPad? Is that a bad way to do it?
I don't think it's bad. And I think it depends on the kid. So rewards in general sort of give this message that like what I want you to do, eat broccoli, do your math homework is awful, which is why I'm giving you a reward to do it. Sometimes it becomes this sticks and a carrot where kids are just, they're so incentivized by the reward. They're like, what are you going to give me to do this? Right. And it doesn't really create intrinsic motivation. Now we know the research with kids that have ADD or sometimes some neurological difference, like the reward is actually the hit of dopamine that they really need to even get started on whatever it is that we're asking them to do. So every kid is different. I think if you were like, hey, I'm going to give you a reward to get in a car seat or, you know, take a bath or take a shower, like I wouldn't do that for things that have to happen regularly. Now, homework does have to happen regularly. Some people find that it actually like seems to work. I think we want to first try to collaboratively problem solve if there's not ADD or something else there, but you can say like, when then, right? Like when our homework is done and it might take 5 minutes, it might take an hour, right? Then we can have our iPad. Like a when then, I think is an appropriate way of phrasing it.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions from Shane, Charlotte, or Lisa that are on right now?
I had a quick question.
Sure.
Is there a certain age where my daughter's 8.5.
Okay.
That you think it's appropriate to tell your kids how important it is, how like important grades are in school?
Yeah.
Where I don't want to overwhelm her now because she's in general a little bit of an anxious kid.
Yeah.
But she's also a rule follower when it comes to her teachers and school.
Yeah.
With me, it can be like, whatever. But with her teachers, like if she knows she has an assignment, she will get that done because then she'll get very stressed out if it's getting too late and she hasn't done it. But I just don't know if she realizes at this point yet kind of what all of this is for and how, you know, step by step as you get older, you know, your schoolwork gets older and grades just get more important as, you know, middle school is just a couple of years around the corner. Where we live, you don't just automatically go to the middle school where you live, you're applying and all of that.
It sounds like from what you've said, like her personality though, is that she's somebody that like would care about grades and that would do the work and that like is pretty self-motivated. And maybe it's because there's this anxious like perfectionism, like I want to do it really well, you know, I want to make my teacher happy. But it sounds like without you having to even say anything, she would be somebody that would be conscious of her grades and her work.
Yeah, but I just don't think she doesn't even know what a report card is because I haven't shown her
Yeah.
report cards. I've just told her when I've gotten them, oh, your teachers gave really nice comments about you and said, you know, you're pleasant in the class.
Yeah.
Or whatever. But overall, like she'll do what the teachers want, but then when it's time, like what Deborah was saying before about the summer, you know, there's no teacher watching over her now. It's just my husband and I. And
Yeah.
again, with the reading, we haven't really done a lot this summer because
Yeah.
she's just not a lover of books and
Yeah.
of reading in general, which is heartbreaking for me because I love to read. And I just thought that would be a genetic thing,
Yeah.
but it's not.
I mean, I also think too, this happens sometimes, this like fear mentality where we look at them now and we're like, what if she doesn't love to read when she's older? Or I love to read, you know, and we like look at those differences when in reality, you know, I don't know, maybe you love to read at 8, maybe you didn't. I mean, I think a lot of times kids do get there. Sometimes summer reading is figuring out a different way of doing it, whether it's like, hey, I'm going to pick a book, you pick a book, let's go to the library, I'll read to you, you read to me, like something like that. I don't think we need to, and the research is pretty clear about this too, like we have more anxious kids in our society now than like ever. Like the anxiety rates are like through the roof. And I don't think that they need one more thing. I think that school's tough, school's hard. There are more pressures in school than there ever has been. I think organically, naturally, what happens is kids start to become aware of like what's happening in the classroom, right? Kids start talking about, what'd you get on this test? What'd you get on that test? Like, you know, and I think that just happens without us having a conversation. I think of our family value and what we talk about and what we think is important is, you know, that you're trying really hard, that we're really praising the effort. And this is sort of a growth versus a fixed mindset, right? Like you're trying hard, you're working hard, and some things come easily to you. Math, you're like a whiz. You just seem to know all these numbers, right? And you don't have to try so hard. At some point, you might actually have to try a little bit harder, right? And the things might not come as naturally. Whereas, you know, spelling or reading, those things are really tough for you and you have to work a little bit harder, right? So we're always like, we're moving away from the content of like the grades versus like the process to get there. Does that make sense? And I think somebody had mentioned there was a question related to teachers too, is what happens if your teacher's not on board with peaceful parenting? So what if you're like, you know, I'm not going to do bribes or rewards, but you go to school and the teacher does, or the teacher, there's a lot of like behavioral charts that happen in school. You know, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, you're in the red zone, the yellow zone, the green zone, like you clip down, you know, all of these things, which if you've got a really cooperative kid, they're probably doing what they need to be doing in school. It probably doesn't even bother them. Some kids, they really do want to meet the expectation, but they have a hard time because it's hard for them to sit. It's hard for them to focus. The work is hard, right? So it's not that they don't have the expectation of doing what they're supposed to, but it's that there's something getting in the way of that. And I think a lot of times teachers and sort of how they were taught and what they think is best is to have these really like conventional behavioral approaches to like keeping order in the classroom. And I think there's a way in which you can say to a kid, if they come home and they're like, oh my gosh, you know, Johnny got in trouble today because he did X, Y, and Z, or, you know, something like that. You talk about it and you say, like, so what happened, right? And I wonder how Johnny felt, and validate that. I wonder how your teacher, you know, felt. I wonder why she uses the clips. Like, what do you think, right? You have a conversation, and there's a way in which you can say to a kid, you know, what we do at home is a little bit different than school, right? We don't really focus on like, or, you know, I know sometimes you have a hard time and, you know, we don't do time out at home or something. And you might say it's a little bit different at school, right? Teachers have a really hard job. There's a lot of kids and a lot of different kids with different personalities. And so teachers are really doing the best that they can. And this is something that Mrs. Jones thinks would help the class, right? And it might be different than what we do at home, but that's what happens at school. Like there's absolutely a way in which you can talk about it with a kid that doesn't disrespect the teacher. And that also helps alleviate some of the anxiety that a kid might feel or questions that a kid might have, just in terms of like how things are different, just like things are different at grandma's house than they are at your house. Like kids can understand that. That was one question. And then another question pre-submitted was times when homework and school like should not be the priority. And I guess I'm just like thinking out loud as to like a context when that might be. Like, let's pretend, I don't know, there's something fun happening with your family. Like you're going to do something at night, it's a longer night, or there's like a swim meet that your kid loves and they love swimming, right? And the night goes longer and they're not able to do their homework or their school, right? And, you know, do you force your kid to stay up late and do their homework, or do you like let them get a good night's sleep? Like, I would always let my kid get a good night's sleep. I might talk about like, maybe we get up in the morning and we're able to do this or something. I think those things are outliers, right? They don't happen all the time. But I think that things that build connection, that build self-esteem, that sort of like make positive memories, I think those things are a priority. Like I trust that kids, I trust that they will work at school. I will trust that they will want their lives to work out. And I think that like, we do want to have that approach instead of feeling like we're necessarily doing something to our kid, you know, to make them like do their homework or care about school or anything. I think anything that feels like a power struggle, right, we're always going to lose, and we don't really want to have that kind of interaction. So I know we're kind of getting to the end of time here. I hope that this felt helpful and answered some questions.
Very much. I mean, I can think of like all instances with my 8-year-old I can apply to this, and then watching the 3.5-year-old start to act the way her older sister does. And I'm like, oh, wow, how am I going to stop this now before we go down the same road? Like, don't do all these things that she does. But I can see that their personalities are very different. So sometimes I see her reacting in ways to mimic her sister. And then I see her like her wheels turning. She's like, well, I don't really actually think that way. I think I'd rather do this. So that's starting to develop her own like real personality. Like you said, like that 3.5. Some time, right? You just said about that, about making decisions and stuff. So
even something like you see your sister doing X, Y, and Z, right? I wonder if that's what you want to do, or you're just, you know, trying to do what your big sister does, like just saying what you know, what you see and kind of pointing that out. But I also think too, it's, you know, back to self-regulation. It's also keeping track of like our fears and worries where, you know, let's say we're having a phase where school is just really hard, or our kid doesn't want to do something. And we like go to this place of like, oh my gosh, if school's hard now at 7, what's it going to be like when she's 16 and school does really matter? Is she going to go to college? And, you know, like all of those fears, instead of just like, okay, let's just kind of look at the moment here, right? My belief is kids want to do well, right? They can do well. Like what's getting in the way here? Like, is there some anxiety? Is there some fear? Is there some skill set she just doesn't have here? Is there, you know, something that is making it hard, and looking at it from that perspective, because that puts us in the position of trying to like problem solve, collaboratively problem solve, instead of the fear-based perspective, which is just, you know, what can I do? What can I take away? And sort of just like a temporary fix instead of more of a, you know, kind of overall general perspective of curiosity.
Right. Awesome.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Any other questions for Kelly, you guys? Not this time. Okay, great. Well, so we have been recording this, and I will put it online on our website, homeworkforkids.com. I am giving everyone here, I will email you guys. We're going to do a free week for everyone, a free week's trial. So you guys can go in and find some tutors, take a look around the website. Let me pull up just a couple other things to share with you. We have our next speaker is coming up on here we go. On August 17th, we have Charlotte Walker, related, yes. And she was the 21-22 Three Chops Elementary School Teacher of the Year this year. She has been teaching for 20 years, and she's going to talk about connecting parents and teachers and just the mutual support she thinks is needed between the two, which is really important. That's the week, I think, right before all of us start going back to school. As I mentioned, we're going to have a free trial for everyone who's here today. I will email that to you. As always, you can subscribe for just $10 a month. We donate a portion of profits to kids' educational charities. Feel free to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and thank you so much, Kelly. And we really appreciate it. I'll make all of her information available to you guys in the email that I sent out as well.
Thank you.